Welcome back to NPTEL online lectures on public speaking. In the previous lecture, we had started leadership skills, and this lecture is also a continuation of the same. But here in this lecture, we shall talk about one very important leadership style and also its related skills, so that you can have a thorough idea or a complete idea of leadership skills. My dear friends, you by now might have understood what is leadership and who is a leader. But here we can take one observation by Sorensen and Apps, who say that a leader is a forceful and dynamic personality. I mean, the focus is on personality, and you remember that we have had a lecture on personality. So, a leader is a forceful and dynamic personality who really leads from the front, an architect, an implementer of strategy, a mediator in conflict situations, an integrator who assures the climate of the organization, a person able to motivate, subordinate, and who by persuasion, compulsion or example to others succeeds in getting others to follow the leader's wishes. Now, if you can go back and think, you will find that every public speaker has got these abilities to motivate, to persuade, and to get others to follow what the speaker wants. Now, leadership can also be understood as, or leaders can be said to be people who inspire, who empower, who share vision, and who lead change. So, as public speakers, you too can allow these things and see to it that you are able to inspire, you are able to empower people with the sort of knowledge that you are sharing, and with your vision and ideas which you are sharing, that perhaps can lead to a sort of change. Now, you might be thinking that what sort of change can leadership bring? Now, imagine you are working in an organization or in an institution, then naturally from time to time you are also expected to adopt leadership. Now, the reasons behind the need for a meaningful and sustainable change in an organization are to overcome the challenges, to change global markets and trends, technologies, and ultimately you want to bring a sort of innovation for development. And who can deny the fact that a leader also is to compete with other rivals in the market. Here is one very beautiful quote by Mark Twain, who in a very humorous way says, "The only person who likes change is a baby with a wet diaper." What is the implication? The implication is that when you are in a crisis, in a critical situation, you actually want a sort of change. As public speaker also, when you feel that you are trapped in a very difficult situation, you actually try to bring a sort of change, and we have already talked about how you can bring that either through digression or through effective citations. Now, because we are discussing leadership, naturally there are certain things that will overlap, but here we are talking about the change management by a leader in an organization. So, what sort of change? The change has to be positive. The change should allow the followers to cope up with the confusion, stress, chaos, meaning thereby overcoming crisis. There can be from time to time opportunities for growth, excitement and adventure of new visions, and that only a go-getter or a person who is leading from the front can go forward to. A leader can also enable to bring the change to benefit the growth and development of the organization. Now, here John Maynard Keynes says the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping from the old ones. There has been from time to time when there are critical moments, it is not only because of the way you want to develop new ideas, but also you actually want to get rid of or escape from the old ones. Now, we shall talk about the 8-step model which actually has been proposed by John P. Kotter, who is an influential author and a leader of change management. So, in one of his creations entitled Leading Change, he describes 8-step model for understanding, leading and bringing changes. Now, the very first is increase urgency towards the necessity of change. Increase urgency, I mean one has to understand the need of the hour, one has to understand the urgency. Another step is build the guiding team, and one has to build the guiding team by right mix of skills and responsibilities. The third is to create a compelling vision. My dear friends, what we are today and what we will be after 10 years from now, so that only a visionary leader can think of, and this vision has to be compelled in the followers too, and not only by simply saying, but by creating in them, instilling in them a desire, and that also through simple strategy. Now, like every effective speaker, an effective leader also has to be an expert and exquisite communicator. He has to persuade his followers, and through the communication, and communication for what? To buy in by appealing to the need of the people. Why do we need this? Why do we need this vision? This actually has to be persuaded. And then another step is empower action. Empower action by eliminating setbacks. From time to time you can come across certain obstacles, and as a leader what you have to do? You have to eliminate those setbacks or shortcomings, and you also must ensure that your followers are rewarded. It is also mandatory to bring in short term wins and aim for achievable targets. This is only because when you win for the first time, it actually boosts a sort of confidence within you. As a public speaker also, those who are novices and once they have made a successful presentation or speech or have been triumphant in some other situations, naturally his confidence is also boosted. And another step in this regard is one never should let up or leave. One should always try to lead with a sort of determination and persistence, because one has to bring a sort of change and make change stick by weaving it, by tailoring it into the organizational culture. Now, how can all these be realized? For that, let us try to understand in depth the basics model, We will see what these basics models are, and then who actually proposed this. Darrell Plakus, Collette Squires and Len Garris in their book The Essentials of Leadership in Government actually outline the basics model, and for that basics model you will find that every letter, I mean all of these have been in capitals, basics, fine. So, all these letters they actually represent some or the other quality of a leader. So, how we can go for that? So, the very first one is behavior. For every leader, for everyone who tries to bring a change by persuading people, he should first have a right behavior. He should actually try to behave with his followers in the fashion that he himself wants. Then aspirations. Let all your followers aspire. Let all your followers dream for something new. Let there be an aspiration, let there be a goal. And the goal cannot be achieved if we do not have the skills. Let our followers also have a sort of skills, fine. So many skills. In the previous lecture also we talked about some skills. Here also we shall see what other skills are required. And then one also should have informational commitments. If one is always hungry after knowledge, if one always wants a sort of innovation, naturally he has to be a seeker of knowledge. And then not only the communication commitments, fine, not only the communication commitments, but he should also aim at having a sort of commitment which also can ensure sustainability. My dear friends, do not think only for today, think also for tomorrow. One should never think that one has to live only today. Rather, we also have to think for the future generation, and this is possible only when we think of sustainability, only when we think of what we are leaving for the upcoming generations. So, these all attributes are actually inherent in the basics model. So, one also has to think that what are the other behavioral attributes associated with this basics model. The test of a good leadership is to do what I had said, you remember, to do the right thing, not as a manager doing right thing, rather to do the right thing, and right thing when? At the right time, for the right reason, and also in the right way. Now, this basics model recommends certain behavioral skills. What are they? A leader has to be visionary, fine. He should always look into the seeds of time. He should also look towards the future, fine. A compelling vision of future is required. He should also aim for collaborative efforts, collaborative projects. He should actually try to motivate people to bring forward their talents, insights and enthusiasm to work together. If we allow a sort of healthy collaboration that can actually result in proper way bringing proper commitments, and it can also stimulate or drive effective action. Then a leader has to be innovative. I mean, one also should have innovative skills and should also allow his followers to have these innovative skills and creativity, so that these two when combined can result in bringing the desired results and solutions in case there is a critical situation. A leader has to be courageous, courageous to the extent that he can at times take risks, challenge conventions and experiment, thinking out of the box. Fine? In order to find better ways of doing things. And then what is actually at most essential is a leader has to be empathetic. Now you remember that while we are discussing speeches, while we are discussing other public speaking situations, what we had told you is that as a speaker you also need to be empathetic. One should always try to ensure compassion, empathy, respect and concern for the well-being and success of one's colleagues, one's followers, one's listeners and also one's audience members. For this, one needs to have a positive attitude, fine. A strong leadership requires optimism and commitment. I mean, followers look to you as a sort of inspiration and ideal, and you too in return should have a sort of trust in them. Leaders can no longer trust in power, instead they rely on the power of trust, says Charles Green. And as a leader, even as a public speaker as well, even one who wants to bring change, one has to maintain a sort of integrity. Now what do I mean by integrity? Meaning thereby, are you able to keep your commitments? Are you also able to keep your behavior consistent? And are you also ready to accept the responsibility of the behavior of your people? If you can stand by your people in times of need, in crisis, then perhaps you actually maintain a sort of integrity and you are empathetic. Have confidence not only in yourself, but you also should have the confidence to the level that you are bold enough to undertake challenging tasks. A leader should also have a focus which is very clear, a focus that is determined, because unless and until you have a focused attention, energy and resources on priorities, you cannot ensure a proper leadership. A leader who has actually from time to instruct, to direct, he must provide his followers with the clarity of direction and also try to resolve conflicts, ambiguities. And what is also important is a sort of discipline, not only self-discipline. I mean, if the leader is not self-disciplined, how can he expect his followers to be disciplined? One has to be well organized and one should have a sense of self-control, determination and willpower. John Maxwell says, anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Everyone can steer the ship, but unless and until somebody shows you the path, somebody tells you the route, you cannot chart the course, my dear friends. Now we had been talking about aspiration. So what are these aspirational attitudes? Everyone as a human being wants to excel. So as a leader also, one should actually try to strive towards bringing excellence by commitment, not only at the personal level, but also at the organizational level. And another aspirational attribute is to be result oriented. I mean, we set a deadline, we also have a sort of timeline, and by which time, but then we should actually be result oriented. We should try our level best that our action towards achieving high productivity and that also in time is materialized. Then a leader should also follow high ethicals and also maintain the standards of high ethicality and principles. If a leader does not possess a moral uprightness, he cannot inspire his followers. So, as a leader, you should every now and then try to instill in them a sort of uprightness which is based on values, which is based on a sort of culture, which is based on a sort of ethics. My dear friends, even though we say that a leader has to be visionary, and as a visionary you set goals, you also have dreams, but see to it that you follow a realistic approach. What do I mean by realistic approach? I mean, when you have a vision, see to it that whether the vision can be completed in the given time. One has to prefer reasonable skepticism over fanciful and unrealistic optimism. I mean, most of the leaders try to take something better out of the opportunities, but one should not be only called an opportunist. Rather, one should see that one brings his rationale and one is scrupulous. Fine. One should be able to follow and lead during situations of crisis, or he should have the ability to convert the crisis into a sort of optimism by negotiating conflicts in a manner that we have discussed in the negotiation, where we talked of that one should always try to see that there is a win-win situation, and ultimately a leader should motivate. He should be motivational, he should inspire the followers, create in them a sort of enthusiasm and empower them to accomplish their goals. Now, in order to achieve all these, what sort of skills are needed? These are actually the models that we had been discussing, but in order to convert all these into action, we actually require some skills. Which sort of skills? The very first is communicative ability or communicative skills. My dear friends, we have already discussed in many lectures that in order to bring home our point, either in a public speaking situation or in a leadership role, one needs to be a very good communicator, because as James M. Kotter and Barry Jed Posner in the leadership challenge say, leadership is actually a dialogue and not a monologue. The meaning is clear, that you actually need to create a sort of two-way interaction, not believing only in your abilities, rather trying to create in others also a desire. I mean, the desire has to be accommodative. Effective, positive and transparent communication is actually crucial to build trust in leadership, and for that we require a sort of content that is carefully drafted, appropriate quantity which can be conveyed through suitable modes, and it should always be two-way. It cannot be one way. You can neither be a good speaker if you are simply speaking to yourself, nor be a good leader if you think yourself simply to have a sort of vision. Rather, in order to achieve the objectives, one has to follow a sort of interpersonal, interactive communication. And moreover, a leader should also be a very good listener. I mean, we do not require a sort of leader who simply believes in a sort of authority. A leader should also listen to what the followers have to say. As Jane of Citrium says, we have been given 2 ears but a single mouth. Why? And the explanation is, in order that we may hear more and talk less. But what happens? In most of the situations, we find that we simply talk more and hear less. We have already discussed in the lecture on listening that proper listening does not take place, isn't it? We hear, but we do not listen, isn't it, my dear friends? So, what we should aim at is, we should actually be a very good listener. In order to become a good listener, we will find, and we can also from time to time, in several situations we find that on many occasions our audience members become inactive listener. They simply hear, but they do not listen. And again here we are reminded of having 2 ears but a single mouth. Fine. Selective listening, when you try to filter the message and choose to hear what you really love to, then it is selective listening. One actually has to have a sort of active listening, when you can take the entire message into consideration, not only verbally but also non-verbally, and then reflective listening. What you have listened, fine. So, the deepest and most involved form of listening, through which you emphasize on emotional aspects of communication and you try to provide feedback to the speaker. So, a leader must have a very good communication abilities. He also must be a very good listener. A leader should also have the ability to resolve a sort of conflict. One should always try to have a sort of skill through which one can resolve differences, resolve conflicts. Since diversity and differences are inevitable dimension of all human interactions, the skill to effectively resolve conflicting conditions become very crucial. Now, here you can apply the strategies of negotiation, fine, during conflict situations, because we have already talked of how you can bring a sort of win-win situation, not only by clarifying questions, by having some backup plan, alternative solutions, making use of your logic, humor, and being very diplomatic. But what happens is, most of the time we follow the other way around. We at times start accusing, complaining, exaggerating, making sarcastic remarks, and bringing humiliations. So, all these are not going to work even in the case of a leader. So, there are certain tips that can bring a sort of positivity. One must always see to it that one is mindful to decide whether the issue of conflict is worth your time and energy. One should never think that this is not my cup of tea, why should I be? No, pick your battles. I mean, one should be ready to resolve conflict. Prioritize conflict resolution over the issue of winning or being right. Sometimes if you feel that you are not winning, but there is a win-lose situation, you should admit that as well. At times it so happens, you can come across as a leader that you do not like a person, but your dislike of the person should not dislike the problem. So, separate the problem from the person and listen to get informed as well as to connect. One should be open minded, and one should always see to it to choose to agree, to disagree, disengage and move on. What is the meaning? The meaning is that there are times when you will have turbulent conditions, but all you need to do is you need to move on, my dear friend. These are some more skills which we have already discussed: negotiation, problem solving, strategic thinking and organizational skills. So, this we can skip. Now, one thing that is very important of a leader is that he should have a sort of decision making skill. And you know, as Napoleon first says, nothing is more difficult and therefore more precious than to be able to decide. So, decision making is very challenging. So, in order to come to a decision, one must follow these 4 approaches. The one is that to decide, as a leader you have to decide, and when you decide you announce it to your group members. Consult them, do not decide only based on your choice, but only after consultation. As a leader you are a facilitator, my dear friend. So, define the problem to the group, and if the need be, delegate. Leaders who have simply been authoritarian, they have not been very effective in all sorts of conditions and situations. So, the need today is to delegate, my dear friends. Now, there are some information commitments also. It can at times be internal. So, if it is internal, you know the weaknesses, and you can take a thorough view of the entire problem. It can be interpersonal, I mean when you are talking to each other or to other group members. Then operational, I mean you need to understand the goal of the organization, and then external, where you need to understand what is happening in the outside world and what you are going to do in order to bring a change or an innovation. Communicating gratitude and appreciation to the team members is very much important. The communication has to be transparent, active listening, which we have been saying that it is mandatory, and then please see that you share information. There are some sustainability commitments also, we have already talked about that. A sustainable leader is one who inspires and supports action towards a better world, meaning thereby thinking about the future. How? Environmental responsibility is also your part of responsibility. How you can bring a sort of workplace health and wellness, and how you must allow the culture of respect and dignity in the organization or in the group that you are working. Now, these are 4 manifestations of leadership. This we have already discussed. You can read all these at your own disposal, my dear friend. One thing that I want to make very clear here for all those people who are thinking of becoming a leader, that be a leader, but do not be a boss. Now, what I mean by boss leadership is that simply you believe that the goal is to be served, fine. I mean when you become a hard taskmaster, fine, you simply use your power and authority and you are showing your own superiority. You give the responsibility, but then at the same time you are inspiring fear. Whereas you need to understand that you are enabling leadership. By enabling leadership we mean others should also grow, all the co-workers should grow, and one has to feel responsible, and one should also feel that everyone is responsible and welcome the input and the feedback. My dear friends, we are actually living in a new age, fine. In order to prove yourself as an accomplished and successful leader, you actually are to follow a sort of personality style. We will not spend too much time on personality because there has been a separate lecture on personality, but then all sorts of successful leaders are expected to have, as according to Dr. Ellen Rousseau's model, there are 4 quadrants, and all these 4 quadrants actually aim at having high assertiveness, high expressiveness, low assertiveness and low expressiveness. So, leaders of a direct personality style are competitive, leaders of a spirited personality style are very much passionate and enthusiastic, a systematic personality style are consistent, and leaders of a considerate personality style are emotional and people pleaser or satisfying people. Now, in order to develop yourself as an effective leader, there are 4 stages which I might have somewhere or the other in one of the lectures I might have talked about. Bruce Tuckman's model, where he says that when you are going to formulate a team, you may come across 4 situations: forming, storming, norming, performing and adjourning. Forming is when you are formulating, naturally you will find that the interaction is there, but then while trying to do so, you will find that you are information gathering and you are establishing clear objectives. Storming, naturally there will be a sort of opposition, criticism, conflict. Norming, situation will normalize, and then performing, when you allow the group to focus on energies and attention, and finally adjourning, where when everything has been done, fine. So, you disband by completing the task and you are celebrating the success of your team. Before we come to wind up this talk, let me also tell you that John C. Maxwell provides some laws of leadership, where he says that there can be some laws which can be followed while exercising leadership. The law of influence, that is already in all sorts of public speaking situation also. The law of process, the law of sacrifice, the law of solid ground, the law of magnetism, the law of connection, and the law of buy-in, meaning thereby inspiring others, instilling others. My dear friends, we are in a new age, I mean 21st century, where there has been a lot of changes. And in 21st century, you find that when you are trying to establish a sort of leadership, you need to remember certain things. The very first thing is organizational culture. In earlier days, things were internalized and procedures were followed, but now in the 21st century, the organization has got a flat structure and it has become customer friendly, and innovation is the mantra. As regards people, in earlier days we used to find that instructions came from top to the down, and there was actually a long term concern and logic was the main reasoning. But in today's world, we find that we allow in every units to be leaders. Everyone is a leader, fine, and knowledge is preferred, fine, and there is a sort of collaboration. As regards system, earlier we had a bureaucratic one, but now we have a system where multiple performances are preferred, and then everyone has to be accountable, and delivery is actually the mantra. As regards information, the information used to be very much controlled in earlier days when it was confined to paper, but now we are living in a digital age, my dear friend. Everything has been digitalized, and that is why we believe in a sort of real time approach, and then we are more candid, and leadership also is expected to be very candid. Now, when we talk about all these and we talk about style, it actually varies from one job to another, but the leadership today is to have a sort of teamwork, have a sort of coaching and delegating, and also the leader today has to entail risks. My dear friends, as Bill Gates had said, in the 1980s, if the 1980s were about quality and the 1990s were about re-engineering, then the 2000s, I mean the age that we are living in, will be about velocity, about how quickly business itself will be transacted. My dear friends, having discussed leadership strategies, style, skills, attributes and theories, time has come that we should end this talk, but before that let me take a quote by Arnold H. Glasgow, who says, "A good leader takes a little more than his share of the blame, a little less than his share of the credit." My dear friends, if every leader applies this, I think world will become a paradise. What happens at times is, when things go wrong, we start blame game. But as Glasgow says, that a good leader takes a little more than a share of the blame. He actually takes the blame on himself, and a little less than his share of the credit. He takes less share, and he says it is actually the team work, it is actually collaborative, and a collaborative work requires conviction, commitment and cordiality. And I think the sort of leaders that we come across in the present age actually prefer vision, values, and they see to it that the followers are also empowered and encouraged. And I think you also will be empowered after this lecture. You will feel encouraged to take up leadership roles in the days to come, and that perhaps will be an asset to your joining this course, where you not only are learning public speaking and speaking on different occasions, but you are also inheriting certain qualities of leadership. With this, I come to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much. I wish you all a very good day.